All right, hello everyone. We're going to get started today with the webinar. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by Acumina and Soho Dragon, Why User Experience Matters for Employees. My name is Janine Markey. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Acumina, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. Joining me is Peter Ward, CTO and co-founder of Soho Dragon, and Troy Trudel, Senior Director of Alliances at Acumina. Let's take a moment and take a look at what we'll be discussing today during today's webinar. We hope that you walk away with an understanding of an introduction into what user experience is and the difference between UX and UI design. We'll discuss the native user experience in SharePoint and how you can build a strategy within your organization for delivering a great UX through SharePoint. We'll then take a deeper dive into the challenges poor UX creates for employees and what that means for your bottom line, and provide you with some real-life examples of how other organizations have built engaging digital experiences focusing on the experience of the user, allowing you to walk away with some fresh ideas for 2018. Before I kick it off to Peter, a quick note that we do encourage questions throughout the webinar. We'll make a pause in between sessions to answer questions as well as take any remaining questions at the end of the webinar. We are recording the webinar and we will send out a recording of the webinar as well as the slides within a day or two after the webinar. I'm going to now kick it off to Peter.
Thank you.
And 1 second here, I'll give you presenter rights.
Does everyone see my cursor just moving around in circles? You should see it now.
Just going to take a second to load. Should
No
be good,
problem.
Peter, now.
Okay, great. Okay, so very quickly about Soho Dragon. We're a Microsoft New York-based partner. We're a gold partner, and we really focus on the Office 365 platform. So it involves SharePoint, OneDrive, and Azure, and we're an Acumina gold partner as well. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about the differences between UX and actually, let me just go back 1 second. Let me just talk about myself a little bit as well. As I said, I'm the CTO of Soho Dragon, also the co-founder. Okay, so one of the things I'll be talking about is I don't have a lot of experience of public-facing websites or UX experience of public-facing websites, but I do have a tremendous amount of experience of architecting SharePoint and intranet sites for employees across the enterprise in multiple industries and multiple countries as well. And so I'm going to be talking about the differences between the UX and the UI, the design, giving examples, and basically talking about the great SharePoint UX and UI on that process. I'm not really going to be talking about you guys need to upgrade SharePoint to the latest version, or I'm not going to talk about Angular frameworks, or you need to install Photoshop, or mobile first is the way. I'm going to turn it up a little bit of a notch and really talk about that process of giving you great UX for your employees. Okay, and remember, like a good quote here from Mr. Steve Jobs, design is not just what it looks like, design is how it works. And that's actually an important statement, is because it's not just about the wireframes. It's really about, well, what are we actually trying to do for the user? So what's the difference between UX and and UI on that? That's sorry, the endless question. That's like the endless question that people always ask. UX is that user experience. The UI is the layout, the visualization, the branding, and that's kind of like where the marketing department gets involved with their wireframes and and the colors and the color palette. Okay, and that UX is what I would class as that traction. Okay, and that traction between the user and their activity or their task then is their end result. So that user experience is that friction between the task and the user. So the key thing here is to make it as smooth as possible. And I'll be showing you a process how to make it as smooth as possible and get it right like the first time rather than the 5th or 6th release. Okay, we've all seen good examples of great UX like Amazon and Facebook. Those are really good examples. And now with like Office 365, the SharePoint interface has really sort of like become has really become rather, shall we say, slicker, mobile friendly, more responses, all web terms that people love. On that, and and people generally want to actually expect. Okay, so SharePoint UX, like why is it important? Well, a couple of reasons. Okay, like firstly, SharePoint is not, I would say, an inexpensive product to install. So you really want to get that product installed correctly with good user experience. So it's what I would class as a tier 1 application within an organization. So it's the go-to place of where information is. And so SharePoint out of the box, if installed correctly, and you can understand that user experience is the perfect tool to actually make this happen. Okay. Now, unfortunately, sometimes with SharePoint is that users often complain that they say that there's just too many options. It's just not intuitive enough. I often say that SharePoint is a bit like German engineering, where it's very good, but it's perhaps not very intuitive on that. And often, like when it has been installed, like IT has to install the SharePoint, and it's kind of like, well, this is what we thought. We actually thought what SharePoint could do out of the box, but actually, SharePoint is that sort of platform for the collaboration, but it doesn't out of the box. It doesn't provide that UX. That's actually engagement with the end users to figure out what they actually want and how they actually want to get that information. And sometimes what I have witnessed in some projects is that the IT department sometimes designs SharePoint for themselves, and it's not what I would perhaps class as user-centric. And that's a key thing, and you're going to see that throughout this whole process. Okay, so why is great UX so difficult with SharePoint? Okay, it's a bit like an iceberg. Okay, so a lot of people look at UX and they see the top of it and they see the top of the iceberg and say, great, we know exactly what we've got, the wireframes, we know exactly what the users want. But of course, with icebergs, under the water is what you don't see. And this is the whole thing, which will almost, like you could say, well, Titanic guys, which will sink a project. I could sort of like say that. So therefore, when you're designing UX with SharePoint, you need to understand certain components of SharePoint and what the user is. So this is probably the most technical slide you're going to see from me, because it mentions certain SharePoint technical functionality, like making the website responsive so it works in multiple devices. You need to know this ahead of time. Audiences, SharePoint audiences, and by doing this, you can target information, and so people are not confused with information that's not relevant for you. And then, of course, with audiences, you can go a step deeper by using like Active Directory groups in the audiences, and so therefore, SharePoint is leveraging off your existing IT platform. And then you've got things like browser compatibilities. Like long gone are the days when we're all using IE. And we're all now using like IE, Chrome, Safari, and Firefox, and Edge as well. So you need to make sure that there's that compatibility factor, and you know this ahead of time. Same with screen sizes. We don't have that 17-inch monitor. We're using tablets, the mobile, wide screens, flat screens, laptops, surfaces. And then we're looking at like the whole thing, like the navigation. That navigation experience is very different on an iPhone than it is on a PC, and that user wants that differently as well on those devices. And then of course now with Office 365 you've got the classic and you've got the modern design, and then of course you've got things like meta tags where you can actually have the navigation being built up automatically depending on how content is being meta tagged. So here you've got this iceberg of SharePoint information, and if you don't really know this or you're aware of this, then this could probably get yourself into a lot of trouble as the project actually goes live. Okay, so great SharePoint and great UX in SharePoint is used. A project release methodology is called traction. This is something that Soho Dragon we actually use. We actually have a UX methodology which we use with all of our intranets. And there's a couple of guiding principles here. Is that paper is cheap, code is expensive, so let's get it right on paper. Okay. You don't want to necessarily give the users the paradox of choice. Okay, the moment you start maximizing people's choices, they make more decisions on what they think they want. This creates more options. It creates you more work, and nobody will make the tough decisions by saying we actually want less functionality. They always ask, can you do this? Can you do that? And at the end of the day, the IT department, when they're delivering this SharePoint intranet solution, there's a lot more options, and of course there's a lot more training that needs to be done on a system because it's a bit more confusing. And remember, like, training is a tax on the cost of your system. You have these end users and they go home and they use these really complex enterprise solutions such as Facebook, eBay, Amazon, Google. To my knowledge, these enterprise applications don't require training. The end user wants to come into the workforce and be using enterprise applications and just have them work, just have them be intuitive on that. So therefore, if you're making it very complex and giving people a lot more options, it just creates more, I would say, more decision making and a bit more indecisiveness about what is it we're actually trying to do. Also, with this traction release methodology, which we'll be discussing further in this presentation, it really focuses in on that we're actually problem solving an issue. This is not like an art display. Okay, so therefore the key thing is that what are we doing with this intranet? Why are we actually trying to have the user journey or that user experience quicker? Usually it's to make the workers more productive, usually to cut down email. So this is our traction methodology here, okay? And this is basically 4 steps. We basically do what's known as a strategy document, and that's where we understand the user. We're producing wireframes, creating storyboards, figuring out what content are we actually trying to do. Is it all PDFs? Is it Word documents? Or is it web text? Okay, and then when that's been, and this strategy document is really a requirements document. We call it a strategy document partly because we sometimes find our clients love the word strategy. I think if you've done an MBA and you have the word strategy in a document, you sort of you pick it up and you actually read the document. If you keep it like a requirements document, people just think it's a requirements document. So we've basically the strategy document is a requirements document, but we've hyped it up with word strategy to appeal to the MBA clients. And then, okay, we can talk about the development. So once that strategy document is being agreed upon, we give it to the development. And that's basically, the analysis, the design, your build out. And then it's the release. Now notice with the release, we're only doing 3 releases. Okay, so on each release, we will actually talk about, okay, this is your feedback, this is what we're going to do, and this is release 1. And then this is release 2. And then this is the final release we're doing to the user base. And when we've done this release to the user base, okay, that's it, it's going live. And then we're going into a stabilized phase. And we're going in a stabilized phase by saying we're only going to do bug fixes only. Okay, and so by doing that, you've got the project live and it's bug fixes only. Okay, and of course you can collect a lot of other requirements, and you might find some of these requirements were nice to have anyway. Okay, so let's just talk about that strategy document. Okay, that strategy document should contain the following information about the users. Okay, you understand who they are, who are the readers, who's reading the content, who are the members, who are the people editing the content owners, and who's actually the owner of the SharePoint site. Now, anyone who knows SharePoint on this webinar will know that this actually is very much aligned with the SharePoint groups. So of course, if you've got this information, you can very easily slot this information into the SharePoint platform. You also want to be asking the user things like their common complaints. Ask them, what sucks about this system? Okay, and I actually asked that question to them, and I just want a really straight answer. if you sort of like say, what would you like or what doesn't work, they sort of like say, if you sort of say, like, I would say mild answers. If you say, is there anything that completely sucks about this thing? It's amazing what people will open up on. They will say the content's not up to date. Okay, you can never find anything. It takes too many clicks. Other pieces of information, like departments, figure out, is this like an enterprise application or a department application? Technology, things like, is Active Directory groups being used within SharePoint? And also ask them, well, what are they currently using at the moment? Maybe it's just all email, maybe it's all Excel being emailed around, or maybe it's the network drive, or maybe it's a WordPress site or something. Ask them what are they using, what they like about their current system, and what they actually don't like about the current system. Because of course, we're actually deploying a new system, and of course nobody likes change. So therefore, if you can say to them, well, by the way, we're changing the new intranet, but this is the extra things that you're actually going to get, and this is the value you're going to get, and we know this because it's in the strategy document, then we're actually quite good. Also ask people what websites do they like and why they actually like them actually on this. And this is important because if people say, I like, if people start saying like, I like Yelp, and like a restaurant website, ask them, why do you like actually Yelp? On that, and it might say it's the color, it's the feed, it's the fonts, it's the look and the feel. So therefore, they're seeing something tangible, and also they're seeing something. You can sort of like say, well, look, if we make this UX experience something like that, does that work? Because you've actually already experienced this, and they're probably going to say yes or no, rather than should we say talking or doing PowerPoint or wireframes at this stage, where it's all a little bit academic and conceptual. They can actually have an experience that you can actually relate to on this. Other things like asking the employee age. We've started doing this, and there's a couple of things we've noticed is that, like if most of the employees are under 30, really when it comes to their user experience, they're looking for like a swipe left, swipe right experience. They have very short attention spans. And of course, the internet must be mobile first on that. And so, and when you talk about that short attention span with the under 30s, like you've got to be designing like an interface where they can actually use this interface while watching the football on Sunday and ordering pizza. If they can do actually that, then you're actually onto a user interface that works for that age group. Okay, and any videos you've got can't really be more than 7.5 seconds, else it's just going to miss the entire plot. And that's sort of like, I would just like to say that's the real acid test, is that whole, of an age group, also like saying, well, look, if this application is for people who are under 30, can these people order a pizza, watch TV on their couch, and use this application? If they can, then you've got an interface that actually works for that user group. Okay, the strategy document goals. You need to define the goals about like finding that information fast, reducing clicks, up to date, those business goals as well. The digital representation, okay, of the corporate website. This is important. So if we were designing an intranet for a cancer hospital, I probably wouldn't expect to have cartoons on the intranet. It should be a digital representation and perhaps in the tone and the mood of the organization as well. Also, things like often a goal with greater confidence with the content. So we're now sort of like living in a world where if one of my friends recommends a restaurant, I will actually look on a website and see the reviews on that restaurant. And even though I don't even know these people, those online reviews will give me greater confidence about that restaurant rather than actually someone I actually know who's given me a recommendation to it. So we've a whole thing about ratings and about comments of content and discussion. It's often not so much the content, which is important, which gives you the confidence. It's also the conversation and the likes of that document, which also adds confidence to actually the content. And also, I would say there's other things as well where people generally don't want to speak to each other. Like if I'm ordering a restaurant, if I'm going to a restaurant, I don't actually want to call the restaurant up. I want to do as much of this I can online, on my phone. I want to book the table and even pay for the stuff on my phone without actually having to speak to anyone. So think about that with things like vacation requests. Can we do as much business process on this intranet without actually the users actually speaking to people. Okay, the user journey, right? So that user journey is really, it's the 10,000 feet viewpoint. It's that starting from start to the finish, the actions and the emotions. Now, you can do user journeys in numerous ways, and like we've actually got templates to do this, and it kind of does depend on how much money and time you actually have on the budget for this. Yeah, you can do the user journeys, you can do the wireframes, and then you can also do things like storyboards as well. So I will do a demo of this, but things like, remember with wireframes, they're just talking really about the layout. I always get like alarm bells when the marketing department are giving me a wireframe and it's got all the colors and the logos. That should be after, but that's not a true wireframe. That's actually that's the layout. The wireframe shows you that functionality. And the reason why this is an important point is that if you start producing initials, we say wireframes or user experience while you're prototyping this, before the layout and the functionality is complete, the user focuses in far too much on like the graphics or the colors of what's going on rather than the user experience. And so you really got to get this locked down, that functionality. Else it's kind of like, well, can we change this from pale green to shamrock green? Then only for the next status call, it's Pistacho green. It just goes on, and it's like, this is, whether it's shamrock green or pale green, generally is not going to affect the user experience of an intranet site. And also with the wireframes as well, is that the wireframes get given to the engineers who are like doing all the HTML and the JavaScript. Generally, they're not the best branders, and I've not met too many, so we say, Visual Studio developers who are great with Photoshop on that. So of course, if you're going to give them a whole bunch of user logos and graphics, and then like they're going to have to like figure out how to resize this stuff. To be very careful that developers shouldn't necessarily be. They should be developing, so we say, that the layout and that user journey rather than doing the graphics from day one. From that. So let's just do a quick demo on this, and I'll talk about that user experience, that user journey. Okay, so I'm going to show you a very simple user journey of a SharePoint site search. What the users were, they wanted to basically access project documentation as quick as possible, and particularly with the budgets as well. So we have a list of all the projects. If I click on the dollar sign for the budgets, it goes straight to the budgets. Their complaint was that information was just too all over the place and there was just too much clicking. So by clicking on this, opens up another tab and it goes straight to the budgets of that project. Okay, let's just talk about other things on searching. They wanted to search on the project codes. So they wanted the ability to perhaps go to the sites. So they could go 85 and immediately go to 85 Jane here, or they wanted like a Google style search, because pits that they liked using Google, they love the Google type search, where you can just type in 85 here, document code, make it A, and then I can click search, and then it will come up with all of the documents on the project of 85. And they wanted also the filter ability to make it Word, PDF, and the user. So here I'm going to make it a PDF. Okay, and then I'm with Chang on this. And then, of course, with this document, there's a lot of, so we say, metadata associated with this, and they wanted the search results just like Google. Okay, so therefore, they wanted the ability to basically see the project codes, the folders, and the library. So I can click on the view properties, and I'll open up the properties, or I click on the link at the top, and I get the, I actually open up the PDF. So that was the user journey. So that user journey was the search box is the start, and then the end of the journey is the search results. Okay, and then this is what's being displayed on these search results. Okay, so that was like, so in an intranet, you might have multiple user journeys being defined, but by having that, the user sort of like knows this is what they want, and it's very easy to sort of have them figure out what they want rather than them saying, let's just make the website pop, which kind of like doesn't really help you or give you any direction. So we talk about wireframes. Okay, these can be part of the strategy document or it's a result of it. It depends on your methodology. I have to say this. And like if you notice, this is a good strategy document, nothing on the images, okay, logos, but it gives you a good idea of the layout. So when you can click on number 4, that will go to the image or where that would actually go to that where that image or that slider is. So therefore, these are actually links. So if you click on 3, you would be another slide to show you, okay, this is where the new release or bed or bedding or dining is. So people get an idea of what the click-through is. And this is that user functionality of what's going on. Okay, and so that's like I said, it's not a visualization, and it's that blueprint given to the engineers to actually do their work. So let's just talk about wireframing. There's a couple of these which we use. You've got InDesign, Balsamic, okay, Visio, or I'm a big fan of pen and paper. Okay, a couple of reasons with pen and paper. I know this is old-fashioned, but there's nothing wrong in sitting down with some of your business users, drafting it up on pen and paper, rubbing it out, okay, and then getting to an end result, and then just taking a picture of your camera and then emailing that to your engineering team. Nothing wrong in doing that at all, you know, because it gives them visibility. What you're seeing with this wireframe, you could do that with pen and paper quite quickly. You could do it in, you know, in Visio, but it would probably take a little bit longer to do that. Okay, so that strategy document is those storyboards. This is the journey. People mobile first. People are typically looking at this on the mobile phones on their train. Okay, and then placing orders or doing activity while they're standing up. Okay, and then you other people doing this. Okay, also with this, you could sort of say, well, look, if this was sort of like some kind of a geolocation application, this is particularly good because it tells you other people in that geolocation, and it actually works on the underground, and then you get an end result. So this is like a typical example of storyboard or a typical storyboard. And again, this is where it gets quite, you know, it depends on how much money you have in the budget if you want to be doing wireframes and storyboards. Okay, this is where we've got that whole 3-release prototyping. Okay, this is where, you know, we've done they've signed up on the wireframe, they've got the graphics, we've got the colors, we've got the color palette. We do those 3 releases, and then so I had that final release. We're giving them a Word document, because the moment you give somebody a Word document to sign, they actually get quite serious with signing off on this, and they'll speak to the business owners, you know, and the other sort of say members of the team, and they'll confirm that it's signed off. If it's generally done in email, then people get a little bit casual on this. But if you can have it like, this is a Word document, we're going to have your digital signature on this, people get quite serious about signing off on it, and it's their name on this. So they will make sure that, you know, I think we've got everything here. Okay, yeah, the site goes live, and then we're in the stabilizing phase. And so that stabilizing phase is bug fixing only. Okay, so, and they, you know, the end user or the business know that this is a stabilizing phase, so they know when they sign off on this, they can't be requesting changing colors or do this. So by doing this stabilizing phase, you're actually disciplined, so we say complete the project on a time frame, because if people are requesting, can we change this, can we change this, the project will probably increase by about 1/3. So with that being said, does anyone have any questions?
No questions have come in so far, Peter, but if anyone wants to submit a question now, we're happy to take a moment to answer your questions.
Okay, that sounds good.
None have come in, so Peter, I'm just gonna transfer over the presenter rights, and we'll kick it off on here.
Okay, great, thank you.
And let me just, Right, I'm gonna hand it off to Troy now.
Great, thank you, Janine. My name is Troy Trudel. I am the Director of Strategic Alliances and Sales here at Acumatica. We are a Microsoft ISV, and what that means is we're a software vendor that builds a software solution on top of their framework. We are a Microsoft Gold partner. We are also highly focused in on this kind of world of digital workplace, digital employee engagement, really internal communication. I think Peter at the beginning mentioned that they really focus at Soho. They really focus more on those types of projects as well. They don't really focus on external facing sites, and we're very similar. We just happen to do it through software and partner with firms like Soho to deliver the solution. We are very highly regarded and ranked in the industry. So analysts like Gartner and others are paying close attention to this space now, really looking again internally and how companies communicate with their employees, how they enable them, how they make them more effective, and we get ranked very highly from a solution perspective by those analysts. We are also very experienced in the industry. We've got about 18 plus years in this content management and engagement industry, spanning all sorts of sites and portals and workloads, and working with literally thousands and thousands of customers. And Peter spent quite a bit of time talking about the difference between UX and UI, and I think he made a ton of good points, and especially when you look at not putting the cart before the horse, if you want to think of it that way, and don't get too wrapped up in visual design early. If something isn't functional, if you're not looking at the user experience first, you're going to end up with a project and a scenario with a lot of challenges. So poor employee experiences, if you don't focus in on user experience first, you're not going to ensure that you're providing the right type of experience for an employee to be able to do the things they need to do, whether it's accessing a document, performing a search, going in and submitting a time off request, whatever those business processes that somebody has to go through. If you don't pay attention to those first, you are going to find yourself in a spot where you don't have the greatest employee experience. And I always think back to any of the design courses I've ever taken, even starting way back in high school, is that the old adage of form follows function. And really what that means is that if you make something pretty but it doesn't work well, it's not very usable and it's not very useful. And that's really a big crux of crafting good employee experiences. They need to be consistent. You need to be able to engage employees. And you need to be able to meet employees' experiences, and those are expectations. And those expectations have certainly shifted over time, especially with all of the access that we all have in our daily lives from a personal perspective. Apple really revolutionized the world for better or worse, if you want to think of it that way, when they introduced the iPhone, and other vendors followed with phones and tablets that connect me to every person and everything that I ever want to be able to do. That has really driven what users expect. Specifically, as the workforce always does, gets younger and younger, right? You've got different generations coming in that grew up with these expectations and expect them to carry through into their work life. And largely, there's a lot of organizations that haven't met that challenge yet. And if we go to the next slide here, this really talks to that notion. And this is a very recent survey, or set of surveys, I should say, that have been done by organizations like Gallup and Gartner. In that, if you take a look at this, this is employees reporting kind of their experience at work. 13% of surveyed employees from Gallup say that they're engaged at work, they're involved, they're committed, enthusiastic. They're using the language of engagement. That means that 87% of employees aren't that enthusiastic, aren't that engaged, don't feel empowered. That's a big gap. And when you take a look at another stat from Gartner, 24% of surveyed employees agree that technology allows them to efficiently accomplish their work. So again, a big gap in there of 70+% of employees that don't feel that way and don't feel like the technology they have at work allows them to be effective and accomplish what they're trying to do. And then, another stat from Steelcase that does a lot of work around just overall workplace of trends and culture. 34% of employees report that they're satisfied with their workplace. So there's, again, a lot of room for improvement here, which is a good thing, because we've got a lot of tools that can help us improve those experiences and kind of change those numbers and hopefully flip them upside down on their head. We want 13% of people saying that they're not engaged, not 87% of people. And so when you take a look at user experience, you really need to look at through a lens of a few different avenues. You need things to be personalized. I think Peter talked quite a bit about that when he's talking about audiences inside that slide with the iceberg on it. But think in terms of, and I've got some use cases here we'll talk to, but think in terms of content and information and systems flowing to the user rather than the other way around. And again, I'll go back to the smartphone dynamic. We're all trained now that on my phone, I can get notifications for things that are important to me and from people that are important to me. I don't have to go in and seek out information all the time. It can find me. And internally, we need to start thinking about that as well. And again, I'll talk about how we do this and some examples of customers that are doing it. But things also need to be connected together. And really what that means is that I shouldn't have to juggle 20 different user interfaces as an employee to get to the different information that I need to see. I should be able to have an experience that brings as much of that together into a centralized hub for me to interact with. And from an intranet perspective, and I think this one's very critical when you talk about intranet versus something like a public-facing site. Intranets need to be informative first and foremost. People don't go to an intranet for an experience like they do a public-facing site, right? I might go to YouTube in my spare time and enjoy the content there, but on my intranet, I need to get work done. I need to access the system. I need to fill out some information. I need to get some information. I need to collaborate with other people. I'm there to get informed and to interact and collaborate. I'm not there to be entertained. And now, certainly you can spice things up with rich media. You can integrate things from social feeds. You can make it more enjoyable, but nothing is going to drive somebody to an intranet greater than being able to get their work done and being able to be more effective in their work. And so it needs to be informative. People need to be able to collaborate. And I would say, in this day and age specifically, you need to be able to deliver that experience across any device. So, I'm on the road a ton. I joked with Peter earlier today that Janine and I are in the same conference room for the first time in a long time doing one of these calls. That's because I'm on the road all the time. And so my main device to consume content on is not my PC or my laptop. It's my phone or my tablet, sitting on a train, sitting in an airport, going from meeting to meeting. So if I couldn't get to our intranet on my mobile device, it would be almost useless to me. And you find many employees are in that same boat, especially with distributed workforces, remote workforces. People aren't in front of their computers all the time. I think to even my children's schools, their teachers, all have connectivity now via all of these great platforms. But the primary way that they interact with my wife and I, as we talk about our kids, is over their mobile device through their email account, not sitting in front of a computer, even though it's right in the room with them, because they're too busy doing other things. And so it's got to be able to be delivered to them where they are and how they're trying to work, and not the other way around. And as soon as you ask a user to tailor their behavior to your systems and your processes, you start losing them. So you've got to really be able to transform the way that you interact with them, get them out of just email, allow them to consume content where they are, how they think about it in a very frictionless way. I think in terms of, again, traveling a lot, I book a lot of flights, via my Delta mobile app. And I don't have to worry about all the enterprise systems Delta has in place to serve me the content and allow me to book a flight or check in or any of that. And I never had to go in and open up notes for that app that in the App Store to read it. And I'd argue nobody on this call reads the notes that come along with apps on their smartphones because they're just intuitive to use. And so all of those concepts have to be carried through inside of our digital workplaces these days. I want to go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about some of these experiences. And we've got some customer examples here. I always think it's important to talk about kind of real world scenarios and not just talk it in terms of concepts, because it's always good to see how people are working with these things. So the Boston Red Sox are one of our customers. They utilize Office 365 heavily, and they used our platform to build the experience that you're seeing here on the screen. And the thing that was critical for the Red Sox was being able to connect with all of their employees. If you think about them as an organization, they've got, for lack of a better word, a large transient workforce. And what I mean by that is, right now, it's December, there's nothing going on at Fenway Park. The majority of their employees aren't on staff right now. You know, they ramp up and hire seasonal employees. Some of them may come back year after year, but they're not there all the time. They certainly don't have a desk. They don't have, you know, your traditional kind of workspace. They're in the field and they're working, you know, for 7 or 8 months out of the year. And so they never really had a great way to address communicating with those employees before they put in place a modern intranet. They would literally have employees show up to games that are rained out or delayed or canceled, and only finding out when they got to the ticket gate that, nope, there's no game today, you can go home. And so even something as simple as being able to communicate with those employees on their mobile devices, the status of a game and what's going on and important information they need to have, was something they couldn't do prior to you know, putting in place an intranet that everybody could access. It was walled off, it wasn't mobile, people couldn't get at the information they needed to. And so even just that simple use case wasn't you know, able to be accomplished for the Red Sox before. And there's certainly a ton of other things they do. They do a lot of great things in their community. They do a lot of great things for their employees. They use this intranet as a way to make sure that employees understand what's going on inside of the organization, the good works they're doing, you know, the benefits they have, the ability to communicate very easily. And they focused on, to Peter's point, what are the things that people need to do, and then we'll design inside of that. And if we go on to the next use case here, we take a look at Church's Chicken. They are, I think, the 3rd largest fast chicken restaurant in the world. So I think just behind KFC and Popeyes. They have thousands of locations worldwide. And they, again, had a very critical disconnect internally in that they couldn't effectively communicate with all of their stores and franchisees. You know, once you got past or below the kind of regional manager level, they weren't doing a great job communicating on down. And so from a user experience standpoint, they wanted to make sure that they could provide content in context of the user. And so if you look here, you know, welcome Colin Rodriguez, we're detecting where that user's located. So I know what content to serve him. We also know, again, to Peter's point, based on personalization, we know who this user is, and we can serve them content based on that. So if I'm a regional director or regional general manager, I'm going to see different content than you know, a store worker in a franchise in Germany. And so it's just about providing that experience where content can come to the user instead of the other way around. Now, certainly, you know, there's search in here, there's rich media, you know, they're all about brands, because that's, if you think about, you know, any organization like Church's, they are their brand, right? They are the stories they tell, they are the way that they talk with their customers and employees. So they want to have that communication there, but they also needed to make sure they could deliver content in context of that user, because the last thing that anybody, you know, any organization like Church's that serves their employees directly needs to have is an employee spending 20 minutes looking for something in the intranet. They can't have that. They need to have real-time information delivery. And so that was very critical to them. And then we'll go to the next or the last example here before we open it back up for questions. This is what GlaxoSmithKline is doing with our software. They've crafted a digital hub that, 1, delivers content in context, but 2, allows me to go in and very quickly get to information that comes from a lot of different sources. So if you see right at the top of the page here, where it says, I want to see all news relevant to me, those are actual filters where an employee can come in and determine what they want to consume at that moment in time, what information is critical to them. So they can literally filter the entire homepage, which they call the hub, down to just the things that are important to them at that time. So they get corporate and global content delivered to them, but they can also very quickly get into a system they need to. They can get into a feed they need to. They can get information from third-party systems that they need, all in one area, and it's all mobile enabled, because 40% of their workforce is in the field. They're not sitting in front of a laptop even the majority of times. You know, they're on a train, they're on a plane, they're in front of a customer. And they need real-time access to information, and they need it in a way that they can search and filter very quickly. And so their user experience was all about, again, turning things on its head. Instead of having the traditional, you know, information architecture that you make people learn, give people the ability to filter the way that information is delivered to them, so they can more appropriately determine in that moment in time what's critical, what they need to consume, what they need to interact with, and not the other way around. And so all of these sites I've shown you have great design, certainly, and design, I think, the UI portion of this conversation is critical. You want to have design that's engaging. You want to have design that resonates your brand, certainly. You want to have design that's consistent. But if you don't focus on user experience first and what the audience you're catering to needs to have from a functional perspective, you're doing your employees a disservice because, design fades, right? Pretty kind of fades away. It looks great and people might love it when they first see it. But if the site isn't usable, if the content isn't relevant, if I can't get to resources that I need to, that design, really doesn't mean much to me as an employee over time, whereas that user experience, that content does. So they're both critical, but I would argue, and this is my opinion, that user experience is certainly more critical than user design from a visual perspective. Again, both are important. I just happen to rank one over the other, just given all the years of experience I have in this space and understanding how employees want to be able to interact with content, with systems, with one another. That user experience is super critical. So, just to kind of round things out, certainly, our contact info is up here. As Janine mentioned, we're recording this and we're going to produce the recording so you can get at all the content again and share it with others. But certainly would love to open it up for any questions for the last 10 minutes that we have together, and certainly between Janine and Peter and myself, we can certainly address whatever questions you folks have.
Great, thank you, Troy. And if you do have questions, feel free to use the control panel on GoToWebinar. There's a question widget there that you can ask questions. We have everyone on mute, so please use the chat interface. One question that has come in, Troy, is probably best suited for you to answer. It's around the examples that we've shown. How is content targeted to a user? Is there a specific back-end system it's tied to, and how does that work?
Sure. No, that's actually a great question. So the system is flexible. We start by leveraging the user profiles inside of SharePoint, and so you can store a lot of data there. But you can also use systems like Active Directory, which a lot of companies have in place that manage kind of data about their users. But we also have customers that integrate third-party systems like an ADP or a Workday or some other system that kind of is that single source of truth for their employees. And then from a how you target perspective, you really can target as granularly as we want. Certainly audiences, which is a larger group of people, can be targeted, but you can target, GlaxoSmithKline, for example, they target right down to the end user. So who am I? What's in my profile? What's important to me? Those pieces of information result in that interface that they get presented with. So there's a lot of different systems that can hold that data, but the bottom line is you want to be able to target against whatever relevant information you can gather. And one of the great things about being an internal topic is you typically know a lot more about your employees than you do about your customers. And so you have a greater opportunity to provide a personalized experience in those terms.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what if you have multiple group of users and some users like the interface while another group feels that it takes too much effort to each what they want? How would you go about dealing with this problem?
And Peter, I don't know if you want to chime in after that, but certainly I think a lot of it has to do with making sure that, to Peter's point earlier, that you understand kind of the majority of what people are after, right? You never are going to tailor the experience to every single person in every single scenario, but what you need to do is make sure you're focusing on what are the majority of use cases that we can address, and make sure you're staying as close to those as possible. If people do feel like it takes too much effort, you've got to really pay attention to that and understand how you can address that, how you can reduce that friction. That's certainly something we do from a software perspective, and I know that Soho does when they're in designing solutions with their customers. They're really looking at how can we reduce that friction. So anywhere that you can make those improvements, you definitely need to pay attention to it. But you do have to keep in mind that you've got to maximize the experience for the most amount of users, and you'll never tailor it to every single individual. You'll just never get a project done.
That's true, Troy. I would add to that. I would say, sometimes you're never going to get 100% of the user base correct. So try and go for the 70, 80% and have a piece of functionality implemented, rather than saying, you know what, we can't do it because 2 or 3 users, are not in these groups. So try and always go for the maximum impact.
Great. Another question is, how would you recommend approaching a revamp of a system or application so that users are interested in the new app and how it works and not go back to using the old one or prefer to use the old one?
And Peter, again, I think this is probably right up your alley as well, but I'll just, from the projects we're involved in, the statement that I would make is very much like what we just talked about is, as much as you can, improve that experience. Find out what doesn't work about it today or why people might not like how things are done today, and then put in place a plan and an approach that makes that process easier, that makes that process more effective for them, that makes that process more intuitive. If you can improve the experience, people won't want to use the old way of doing things, but you've got to start by analyzing, is there something broken or wrong with the current process, and how can we fix that?
Yeah, it sounds like you've had a launch that's been a bit of a missed launch there. I would say, all right, let's just step back and let's do a reboot kind of thing, and just go back to say, firstly acknowledge that perhaps this has not worked as well as it should. We're going to do a reboot as a re-release of the project or the application, and speak to that user base and identifies what's working, what's not working, what's not working as well as it should. Okay, what would they actually like, and get a priority list and say, great, we're going to reboot this, and we're going to spend X amount of hours, and we've prioritized the functionality list, and we're going to do the top 10 items, and then we'll probably do another release with the top 20 items, and just take it from there.
Great recommendation. It looks like those are all the questions we have for the moment. If any other questions do come up, please, feel free to contact us directly using the contact information on the screen, and we'll be mindful of your time today. And we thank everyone for taking the time to listen to our webinar, and we hope to have the recorded session out to you tomorrow or early next week. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great day.